Hello and welcome to Mind What Matters, the show where data security beats real talk. We're here to unpack the big stories, the hidden risks, and the curious moments from the world of cybersecurity, all with a little dash of fun. Whether you're protecting data in the boardroom, the cloud, or just your phone, we're here to help you mind what matters. My name is Samuel Hill, and with me, as always, Landon Brown. Landon, how are you this week? What is on your mind?
I'm fantastic, Samuel. Appreciate you making the time again this week to host Mind What Matters. On my mind this week, we as a team had a really big travel week last week for our QBR up in Bozeman, which is where you live, Samuel. So you were preparing for this probably more than most. But we got to do a lot of really fun things. We got to get together as a team. We got to eat good food. We got to hang out at our fellow team members' houses, which is always a little bit more intimate of a connection and a team growing experience. We also got to go fly fishing. We got to ride some motorcycles. It was probably one of the most adventurous QBRs that I've seen to date.
I was going to say the same thing, Landon. That's what's on my mind this week as well is I have been to a lot of quarterly business reviews, QBRs. I'm sure you have, and I'm sure many of our listeners have attended their fair share. Some of them are memorable for all of the wrong reasons. The business performance is not quite where you want it to be, so there's just an extra level of stress, or the happy hour is less than happy for someone at the end of the night who may be overconsumed, or just maybe the accommodations and the food, and it's not exactly what you would want to remember. But no, it was a wonderful time. It was great having everybody here in my hometown where I live, and to kind of experience a lot of the fun and the best things that Bozeman does have to offer. It speaks a lot to the people who came as well, who were just willing to roll with it and get random rides and pickups from the airport instead of getting Ubers and things like that. So good time was had by us. So you said it was your first time fly fishing. You live in the Rockies too. You live in fly fishing capitals of the world. Like, why was this the first time?
Yeah, I think when you have an active family that does a lot of hunting, and hunting of its own is a big pie chart of all the different types of hunting you could do, from deer hunting to elk hunting to bear hunting and coyote to ducks and pheasants and grouse and all of the different things. And then you have fishing, and that's its own realm of itself and its own massive pie chart of things to do and things to master. And I can say that, I've never been a fan of lots of seafood myself, and if I think we're going to go hunt and something is going to grace us with its life for food, that we should definitely eat it and honor it in that way. And so just a lot of different focuses in hunting land animals, and I think the other is, if I'm not going to eat it, I'm not going to catch it. So I think the QBR, we got to do a lot of catch and release. We had a guide that was there helping us do a lot of the setup and the netting, and a lot of the things that I think are we bring down the barrier to entry for a first-time fly fisher, and it was amazing. I mean, we floated the Yellowstone River for, man, I gotta say, 5 or 6 hours. It was nothing but absolute peace. A storm came in about 3/4 of the way through, so we got to experience rain and wind and a little tiny bit of choppy water on the Yellowstone River. But man, it was a blast. And I can say though I've never been a big fly fisher, I think it's something that I would do again for sure. And maybe we'll have to come up to Bozeman more often for it.
And it's just something else that you could spend your hard-earned money on. There's plenty of stores that'll take just hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of dollars from you on gear that you may or may not need. None of which will help your casting and your getting the fly in the right spot. That's up to you. That's technique.
That's right. Well, my wife will love to hear that there's another activity we get to spend our money on. So I'll pass it along.
There you go. Hey, Landon, let's jump into some of the hot topics from this week that we want to talk about. We're going to mind the headlines here as we get going. And the first one, I'm really curious your take on this, was some big news that hit across the wires today. It was about Nvidia making a very large investment in something I did not see coming, to be honest with you. But Nvidia investing a cool $5 billion, and Landon, I know, at $5 billion, it's with a B, $5 billion into one of their direct rivals, Intel. What does this tell us about the AI arms race in our world today?
Yeah, I think depending on who you are, this either caught you like a left hook or you saw it coming from a mile away. And I can't really decide which one of those people I am. But it's absolutely kind of breaking news to see that Nvidia, who is competing with Intel over the years, along with the other players, are now starting to form somewhat of a strategic partnership. And I think, geopolitics aside, I think it does make a lot of sense in our country when we look at the lack of chip development, when we look at the areas of the world that we're really siloed to in terms of where we get those chips, it does make a little bit of sense why NVIDIA, who would require a separate architecture for some AI systems during the AI arms race and for some kind of computer architectures, for even NVIDIA to excel, they have to have some backbone and infrastructure to run off as well. So it does make sense strategically for NVIDIA to do this, especially with the moves that we've seen with the US investing some dollars as well in Intel. It seems like what we can tell is the US is taking this serious. The US is saying, hey, there's too many single points of failure in the world where not just the America, but the entirety of I would say the Western and nearing the Eastern portions of the world may be cut off from chips should something go tragically wrong. So I find it really interesting. I also um, am starting to see that there is an increasing need on CPU architecture. We've spent a lot of time as an industry talking about parallel operations that GPUs provide, and that's really the spawning and the birthplace of machine learning and artificial intelligence chips and chip design. But there is still a world where linear computation is best driven. And I think that is potentially one of the areas where the US and maybe NVIDIA is seeing the writing on the wall where, hey, parallel architecture, chip architecture is really important, but there's still a world and a need for, these linear operations that are more CPU driven that Intel plays a serious critical role in.
Yeah, I mean, just the raw horsepower sometimes you have to apply to a really complex linear process. And obviously, Intel has excelled in that. Their x86 architecture, I think it's a stay of execution, if you will. The rumors of its demise are now greatly overstated. And, Nvidia now sitting with $15 billion of recent investment, both from the US government and now from, I'm sorry, Intel sitting with that investment from Nvidia. It's fascinating. And I think this really shows the AI innovation arms race not over yet, and this is a pretty interesting development. So I'll be curious to see how that goes and how Intel does. The clear point, though, the big loser is AMD. The big loser is there. What are they going to do now? That's how do you compete in that space? But I'm sure they'll find a way. I'm sure there's some smart people there that'll try and figure it out. Next on the docket here today is this article. You sent this over to me, Landon, and I'm curious your thoughts around it. It's this idea of rogue communication devices found in Chinese solar power inverters. I mean, the geopolitics aside of this, any foreign nation that has the ability for devices that are installed in critical infrastructure across the United States to phone home to a foreign power, probably not great. But what do you make about all this?
Yeah, I think it flows well with what we were just talking about, which is why I sent it over to you so quickly as I was kind of iterating my thoughts around some of the things we were going to talk about today. And I think a precursor to this is there's kind of two areas of focus when it comes to chip manufacturing. There is the advanced AI arms race, right, that we are trying to stay ahead of, and we see Nvidia and the U.S. government and Intel starting to cooperate on this for quote unquote the greater good, right, depending on your perspective on things. And on the other side of the fence, we have what we should probably think about as commercial scaled manufacturing for low complexity chips and architectures, right? Which is kind of what we're seeing as a big area where we're exporting or we're getting exports from China in regards to things like solar panel power inverters, when it comes to the chips that are in our children's toys, when it comes to even some of the chips that are in some smartphones, even though some smartphones some companies are starting to try to be a little more aligned there with the US. we're still seeing that the majority of commercial manufacturing for chip design and chip architecture and quote unquote distribution in the market is coming from China. And one of the things, again, trying to keep geopolitics out of this a little bit, is that maybe part of those investments into Intel are to try to boost that commercial manufacturing in the United States because of things like this. I think it's no secret that all countries all have a backdoor that could shut down everybody's grid in the case of a war. And it kind of falls along the lines of mutually assured destruction. But this is a really good example of, are there areas where we could boost manufacturing from a chip design and a chip manufacturing perspective, where we avoid these things? And I think, these kinds of headlines are becoming.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the politics is not the scope of what our conversation is, but at the end of the day, a catastrophic failure in critical infrastructure would be devastating to our world and our people. And you're right, it's no secret that there's lots of backdoors, and just so I guess it just really highlights the criticality of security for those cyber physical systems and the things that really provide our modern way of life. So
Absolutely.
fascinating to see, and it's interesting take about the chip manufacturing shifting onshore here in the United States to kind of help perhaps help with some of the cybersecurity issues here. All right, last one that is on the news for us today. And this is a I just got an absolute kick out of this one. This is Meta, right? Mark Zuckerberg, the famous Mark Zuckerberg, founder of Facebook, now Meta, is doing a live demo in front of thousands of developers. They're in the room. You can kind of see them in his little POV camera. And he's trying to demo the new features of their Meta AI, with the Ray-Ban glasses. The glasses look sharp, and you'll see that. But any of us in technology, we feel this pain directly. All of us have had demos that go exactly wrong, and this is an example of all of that.
Pause WhatsApp video call. There we go.
Oh, the first you know it's good when the first happens. That's not a good sign.
That's too bad. I don't know what happened. Maybe Buzz can try calling me again. All right. Well, I got a missed video call. Okay, there's the actual video call. All right. I'm just going to pick that up.
All of us have lived this moment here in a live demo environment, trying to showcase something that a customer is asking about, or a key piece. And as he says, it happens.
It certainly does. And I think that a good example of that just happening is my son walking in the room as we're covering this exact topic, which is just ironic and coincidental and all of the funny things. I think it's funny watching the moment of reckoning when the first comes out and the upper lip starts to sweat, and you've realized that everything that we have prepared for and thought we were very confident about suddenly no longer works. And then the final statement of, I guess I have nothing to show you, we'll just move on. I've been there way too many times, in person and virtual. So I can't throw too much shade at Mark Zuckerberg here. Tech is hard, and live demos are even harder.
Yeah, and I think even later on in the event, they tried to do a like a cooking demonstration or something like that, and they couldn't get the AI to do like the ingredient steps right, and it just was. So condolences, Mark, to Meta, to the whole thing. I don't think I'm going to be rushing out to buy that product, but probably more because I don't wear glasses, and I don't know that I would need an AI interface to the physical world personally, but that's just me. All right, let's dive into something. This is a topic that we're going to do this week. We're not going to do this every week because it might get us in some trouble. I think the overlords here at Mind might have an issue if we always did this, but this topic is called Speak Your Mind. And it's just really the truth that just sometimes has to be said. You got it. You know what? Darn the torpedoes. I'm going to say it anyways, and we'll see what happens. And the topic I want to talk about in this section is, how many times have you run into a problem and you go about solving it and you think to yourself, well, there's got to be a better way. But there's not. I gave an example to somebody recently about, I don't know if you did this, Landon, growing up, but we had to split wood to heat the house that I grew up in. And so I spent my teenage years exercising all of the angst that I felt with a splitting maul in my hands and a wood pile in the backyard. Taught a lot about hard work and all that kind of stuff. But if you had told me that there's such a thing as a hydraulic splitting apparatus or whatever you call those things, it would have been mind blowing. All I have to do is pull a lever and it splits the wood for me into all the pieces that I'm going to need to stack. And it's how many of those things happen in our world and in our life where we just do something because it's the way we've always done it, because, well, it's going to take me longer to learn the new thing than it would be just to do the old thing and all that kind of stuff. Landon, are there any examples that you can think of stuff that is just people do the same thing because it's just the way it's always been done? It drives me crazy, especially when there might be some better ways.
Yeah, I think there's, when we look at cybersecurity, I think this is a rampant thing. And I think for some good reason and some not, some regulatory compliance, some very strict process. Auditability is a big one too. Moving away from an established process that we can audit is sometimes hard in the enterprise. But I think that there are things that are outside of that absolutely we do just because we've always done them, and it's very hard, especially with mysterious terms like AI and ML and all of these different SLMs and LLMs and all of the keywords we could throw, that we don't even want to consider an alternative with those because the mystery and the I would say the gravitas that the market is just thrown into that. And I think one of those things pertains to data classification and the way the market is doing this, and the way customers expect data classification to function, even though we know that shortcomings exist with certain ways that we do that today.
Yeah, I mean, I think of it. One example I think of is, how many times have you gone somewhere and they're like, oh, well, you got to plug in order to make sure you have a really good, strong connection. Modern Wi-Fi has been great for many, many years, and in fact could even be argued is more secure in some ways. But still, if you want to make sure you have a robust connection, you got to plug the wire into your computer. And I think about that in cybersecurity too. Like, there are so many things that people do just because, well, the only answer we know is to either throw more bodies at the problem or just double down on a bad process and just maybe try and do it faster. It reminds me of the joke, right? AI now allows us just to do the dumb thing faster instead of getting it right.
And it reminds me, Samuel, as an aside, I just spent a lot of time chopping wood as a young boy as well. We had a wood stove in the house, and that was what we used to heat our house every winter. And I did bring up the topic of a hydraulic press. I actually, honest to God, spent my allowance money renting a hydraulic press, knowing that a big wood chopping season was up and coming. And my first hydraulic press of that lever to chop the wood, the hydraulics broke and it sprayed hydraulic fluid all over my face. And I said, I tried to be innovative and I tried to do something new. And I think this also speaks to what happens when you're not properly trained or expecting the right things, and why some people try something new and then revert back to the old idea that they once had before as well.
Yeah, it's that adoption curve, right? Well, that brings us to this next section, which is the deep dive, where we're going to go a little bit deeper below the surface to try and understand something. And I think, Landon, you and I are prepping for this a little bit. And this is an area of cybersecurity that is one of those where people are just kind of doing the same thing because that's what they know to do. And this is the idea of regular expression matching, or RegEx, as it would be called across the industry. Probably not with fondness. I bet you people say it usually as an epithet of some kind, followed by curse words. But RegEx is the idea of, we're going to look for a regular expression that occurs across our data to be able to mark something as sensitive and give it an appropriate classification of some kind. Why don't you explain it to us, Landon, and help us go a little bit deeper on this topic?
Yeah, you know what I would say is I think any data security professional out there that hears the words RegEx is probably shivering. Our ancestors probably roll in our graves for how hard we've made our lives with RegEx. And I just kid there. RegEx did serve a purpose for a long time. I think technology has outpaced what RegEx is capable of. But again, to your point, we're still stuck doing some of the same things. And so what is RegEx? RegEx is, as you said, it's a regular expression. I think if we had to put it in layman's terms, it's a very unique built expression that is looking for specific keywords oriented in sometimes a specific way with a specific case and a specific format within a string, and then being able to say, Is there any of this very, very unique and unchangeable thing within a document or an email or a text message or something of the sort, wherever we may be deploying regex? And so when we think of regex, we think of, hey, I have a very specific thing I want to find. And what that also leads to is a lot of other things that may look like that thing. And hence, one of the reasons I think we're seeing a lot of frustration with that today.
Well, that's the thing, right? It's looking for a specific pattern. And it says, social security numbers in the United States are 9 digits, often with a dash in the middle of it. But you have to build them in a certain way to be able to catch all of the different variations of that. And I think that's where the complexity arises, right?
Yeah, it is, right? And I think the follow-on outcome of that complexity is that if we build something very, very specific to find a very, very specific thing, what happens when that very, very specific thing changes ever so slightly? And this is, again, I think, core to the problem of why people have lost a lot of trust in data security solutions over the years. If that thing does change very slightly, either two things are going to happen. We're going to have a false negative where we miss something entirely, or we're going to have a false positive and a lot of them, right? And what we've seen is there hasn't necessarily been a shift away from regex in some ways, but there's been a more emphasis on creating more regex or more regular expressions in the market. And again, I think again goes kind of back to your point, saying no, where you say, this thing isn't working, so we're going to do more of this thing in hopes that this thing finally works. And at what point do we look for something a little bit more or change the way we're doing things?
I mean, I just picture Mark Zuckerberg looking at a regex, the list, the whole lines of it, right, and trying to get it to work properly to catch that one thing that's sensitive at Meta. I can imagine, and it not going as well. Maybe a little bit better than the AI Ray-Ban demo. I don't know. So, Landon, here's what I've learned this week as we wrap up. I've learned that it's probably good for our kids to go split wood in the backyard. That's something that built a lot of character for me. Also built shoulders that can carry a lot of weight, and was forming. So sometimes, if it's a character forming exercise, it's good to do things the old way and build some strength and grit and endurance and things that we want our kids to aspire to and hopefully live up to one day. But Landon, what have you learned this week?
Yeah, I think one of the things I learned this week is just the value of people in our society. I think that there's a lot going on in the world, and something I didn't necessarily want to touch on today, but love your family, love your kids. And if anything, what I learned this week is I have a lot of room to grow in where I put my attention and where I put my passions. And those two things are definitely the right areas in work and enabling people and loving people where we work. And it's also loving and taking care of my family. And I think we've had a lot of emphasis and a lot of time to think on that as of recent. And you can expect to see me doing more of those things.
All good stuff. And I think, like I said, if it's loving your sons to make them go split wood, you have my blessing, Landon.
Thank you, Sam.
Hey, for Landon Brown, my name is Samuel Hill. Thank you for joining us on this week's Mind What Matters. That's all for now.